What's up guys, it's pt3 printing technology. So for this video we're going to be building a mk3s, a Prusa mk3s 3D printer, but this one's going to have a Nova 3-passion Nova hot end on it. So if you've been watching the videos we put on the channel for a while, you'll see I've done part 1 and part 2 of this series. This is going to be the third and final series of the building. This is going to be the third and final video of building the printer. On the last episode we left off with the half of the E-axis and some of the electronics, I believe. And so for this video we're going to be wrapping all of that up and doing a test print with it. So the goal of this final video is to finish the hardware and download the firmware for the printer and to get an actual print out of it. We're not focused on getting a perfect flawless print yet. That'll be a later episode for like fine tuning the Prusa mk3s and enable hot end and size settings and stuff like that. But yeah, so this could be a mostly a voiceover assembly guide type video. So I'll have an overlay up on the side, I believe, of the assembly instructions for the printer. As we're going through that, we'll start at the beginning of the printer build, and we'll recap all the stuff I've got done in the previous episodes, and then we'll pick up where we left off and finish assembling it. So let's get into it. And these instructions can be found on pt3.com under the assembly guides. Only thing that's really different for the Nova hot end is probably 2 or 3 3D printed parts that can be found on 3Passion's website. They're the company that makes Nova hot end. But anyways, let's get into it. So here's where we were when we left off. We got a partially assembled y-axis, a partially assembled x-axis, a partially assembled e-axis. So now we're going to be working on finishing up the y-axis, starting the z-axis, and attaching the x and e-axis together after finishing assembling those as well. Also, we mentioned in the previous episodes that we're going to be using the bare x-axis pieces and a 32-bit board. We decided in this video to take those off and just use the stock Prusa parts and the Nova hot end just to make this episode shorter and to make it easier to assemble. Later on we might decide to upgrade the printer, but for this build that's what we're going to be using. So we've got the y-axis done and the x and z-axis done. So the display board, power supply, heat bed, I think that's all of the major components. But anyways, we got the power supply in finally. We have 2 mk3s screws for the power supply mount to the T-nuts, block nuts, short nuts, however you want to call it. And we got a 623H pulley for the x-axis. So we're going to attach and assemble all that stuff right now, and then see what else we get to come in next. So here we have the 2 nuts for the power supply. The Prusa company says to put the M310 screws for the power supply. To use M310 screws for the power supply. So we're going to put these in here right now to not lose them and to have them ready whenever we're ready to mount the power supply. Here they are in place. Don't really like how loose these nuts are, so I may upgrade these later on. Here is the power supply that finally came in. So it is a gray edition one instead of the black one, but I believe this should work just as well as the black one does. It's hard to source the black power supplies outside of Prusa's supply chain because it is a newer item and the grey ones have been around a long time. So if we can source a black one, we will do so in the future, but right now I stuck with the grey ones and they work just as well. Now moving on to the x-axis. So I already have this piece assembled just to test fit a lot of things, but we'll get the 2 end pieces and the 4 bearings, and I'll put 2 bearings on each piece and make sure the ball bearing slot lines up with the position on the prim part, and then we'll M3N nut on the back side of this piece. The mk3s plus is a little bit different, but same principle. And for the x-axis, we'll get the 2 biggest rods out of the set of 3. And also we want a M318 screw on the top part of this piece. So another M3N nut on the side. And then we're going to get the stepper motor and the pt3 16 pulley and mount that onto the motor. One way to line this up is to slide the pulley onto the motor and address it to the prim part slot. And once that's mounted, we can get the 3 M318 screws for the motor as well and connect them to it. So now we have the Z-axis assembly. So for the first step, we want to get the 2 bottom Z-axis prim parts and 3 M310 screws for each side to be able to mount it to the frame. But before we mount the motor, I'll make sure the screw covers is mounted properly. And then once that's all completed, we can get 4 M3 10 screws for each motor to mount to the frame, to the prim part. And once that's done, we can get the 2 trapezoid nuts, get 4 M318 screws and 4 hex nuts, and begin to mount those to the 2 x-axis prim parts. The nuts on these pieces are a little bit difficult to mount since one of them's on the inside. And then once we get these 2 trapezoid nuts mounted, we can move to the 2 Z-axis prim pieces. These pieces. For these pieces, we're going to need 2 M310 screws on each side, and we're going to adjust the lead screw and the rod into the piece before we mount it to the frame. And once that's done, the Z-axis is complete. Alright, so here's the final step. I have the pin to probe installed. So the one I ordered from 3primpart.com comes with some nuts and washers. I tried this out, and then just loop the cable behind it and out through this slot right here. Once I get the part fan, I'll put the cable for it behind the pin to probe cable. But overall, this is it for this build. Like I said, I'm still missing a few parts like the part fan, outdoor spring. Decided not to use that piece. And the mk3 sensor. This is a mk2 sensor I'm borrowing from a mk 2.5 upgrade that I've been putting off. But overall, it's essentially it for this build. So this next segment's going to be kind of fast since we got most of this complete in a previous video. But basically, we're going to add a few more parts that we didn't get added in the previous video. One being the extruder screw, another being the pin to probe. We also have a nut on the pin to probe to try that out instead of using the screw on the inside of the pin part. So we had to go back in and change the wiring on the heatsink fan. The Prusa takes a 3 cable one, while this one's 2 cables, so I had to switch that around. And we have a part fan mounted on it, but there is no fan shroud, so we're working with a designer to fix that issue. So you won't see that on this video. But if you're interested in working, keep an eye on that. Check out our Instagram or other social media accounts. And yeah, that's pretty much what we've been doing to this E-axis build. We also add the E-axis belt on the back side, along with the back printed cover for the E-axis. Alright, so now we can start to assemble the display screen for the mk3. So the display screen, the plastic knob, and the 2 cables is a kit that I've purchased. It's available on 3printerpart.com like the majority of the rest of these parts. But for this printer, Prusa uses a custom knob, so I won't need the blue black plastic one. So we can set that to the side. So now we're going to test fit the display screen into the printer case for it, and then we can start to attach the screws and nuts onto it. So here it is, test fitted. As you can see, it fits good, and push it to click for the button, and that's what the back looks like. So what we need now is get 4 screws for the display screen, and then the mounts for it will go something like this, where it clips onto the back of the board and be mounted with the screws and nuts on the printer frame. For this step, we'll need 6 M310 screws, 4 for the frame and 2 for the bottom 2 screw holes, and 4 square nuts. So if this is an official Prusa kit, we put the ribbon cable with the 1 strap on the left hand side and the ribbon cable with the 2 straps on the right hand side. But this isn't an official Prusa kit, it's one I'm making from scratch. And the supplier I got the board from, the display board, doesn't have the right board of 4 and 2 straps. But I believe the cables are both the same thing. So if one way doesn't work, we just switch it. Once we start testing the electronics and power supply and stuff. Alright, so to start assembling this, I'm going to put this one on the right hand side and the other one on the left hand side because it's 2 different pieces. I believe this is the left one, but if I'm wrong, we can always change it. So it's going to go like this with the button on the right hand side, and this just basically snaps into place. like that. And I'll do the same thing for the other side. Like this. So now we can put it into place on the display mount. And you can see we got two slots, one here and one there, so we're going to slide the pieces over to make it fit. So like that. Then push it into place. And then you can always test it by pushing the button. So now we're going to screw the two M310 screws in the bottom hose, put the screw nuts in both sides of the mounts, and fasten it to the front. Alright, so we got all screwed in. So we got one more step left to do is press the button onto it. To be able to feel it turning once it's placed, and then you can make sure it clicks. So the second piece clicks, and there is the LCD display assembled. We still have to attach this to the board and make sure it's in the correct slots. I can do a closer look. Got the SD card slot, and then remove the supports right here. We got one side of the M310 screws and the other side with the screw nuts in position. Okay, so we got the power supply unwrapped for the mk3 3-printer build. I have the power supply cable plugged in so I don't sit outside and lose it for now. We have the cables that's going to go to the control board, motherboard, whatever you want to call it. So it looks like it is not the black one like Prusa has, but that's a supply train sourcing issue. And you can see it got the 3-pin base plate already. And here's the mount it's going to be mounted with. So now we gotta get the printer frame and see how we're gonna mount it. Alright, so we have the frame now. And this one's gonna be a top mounted one since it's not really feasible to mount by the side. Now, it looks like the nuts, the short blocks are the correct length, so I can flip it to screw into place. I don't really like that it is sitting above the fiddle level or table level. Whether it be like this so it can have more support, but it is what it is right now. So we're going to do a test fit on the screws. Okay, so the power supply is mounted now. So we can see the two screws in place. Yeah, probably need a little bit of adjusting to get in the right position. But it is mounted. So it's one more step complete. For the power supply, we'll go wait for the motherboard to arrive so we can wire the power supply cables to the motherboard. And we're still waiting on the display to arrive and a few more hot end components like pin to probe, filament sensor, etc. So we have the heat bed, go in the rat pit and take the bags and bag parts out. So here's the heat bed with the parts that's included with this particular kit. Got 2 3-pin pieces, bag of screws and hex nuts, another bag of screws, and it looks like spacers. This is the heat thermistor cable. It has the 2 screw holes on this one, and we got a textile sleeve. Alright, so it's all the parts laid out for the bed installation. For the first step, we're going to need the bed. We need 2 mk3s screws, 2 washers, and 2 nylon nuts. So I believe it should be this bag right here. So we take these out, and these will be for this portion of the build with the cable. So that appears these are all mk3s screws in the bag. We do have a few hex nuts mixed in, so make sure you get the bigger of the 2. So setting these off to the side, we want to get the 2 screws and 2 washers and put the washers on each of the screws. Then we'll get the power cable. We're going to start with the black one first. Put the washer, put the screw washer and cable onto it. The black cable is going to go on the side of the bed that says ground, so it should go something like this. Put that one through, and then you can put a nylon nut on the back side. We'll put the red one on, and then we'll tighten these screws up. We'll do the red the same way. Got the screw and washer, and we'll slide it through the power cable, and then through the hole on the bed, and I'll put a nylon nut on the end. Next we can move on to the printed pieces, but first we'll make sure the cables are slightly inclined to each other. That's how the instructions put. Something like this. But we get the 2 prime pieces, 3 more mk3 screws, mk3s screws, and the hex nuts for the next step. So to start with, we're going to get the bigger of the printed pieces and the 3 hex nuts, and we're going to slide the hex nuts into the hose for the hex nuts on the printed piece. So we got 2 on the back, and it looks like the other ones go on the front side. So on this, we're going to put in the top 3 hose, the hex nuts. You can see the bottom. I'm holding the hex nuts in. So we're going to set the other 2 pieces aside. Get one of the mk3s screws. I'm going to turn the build plate on its top, put one of the screws in the bottom like this. Go move the screw up to the next one, so it's like this, and we can see the cable is twisted like we had it. Now we can take the mk3s screw and screw the front piece in place. So this is how it should look, top side, bottom side. So next step, we can get the thermistor cable and position it between these two, this mk3s screw and the nut nut. And we can get the textile sleeve that came with the bed kit and start to wrap it around the cables, the two power cables and the one thermistor cable. So the next step, we can get the second part of the cover, and keep in mind this has to be between these two. Place it on top. So it's lined up. Then we can get the two more mk3s screws, put it through these two holes, and that way it will connect with the hex nuts on the other side. Now we can finish wrapping the textile sleeve around the rest of the cable. This is what it should look like. Ideally this should be inside of the cover, but I don't think it might fit, or I'll make it back over and redo it later on. But that's where it should be at, where it works like it is. So finish doing the textile sleeve over the rest of the cables. Then we'll get this bag of parts and start to mount the board to the frame. We'll start with the center piece first. Alright, the first one is done in the center. We're not going to tighten it up all the way, so we can get the other 8 screws positioned. Then once we get them all positioned, we'll go back through and tighten them up. So we'll put the screw in from the top, put the spacer in between the frame and the board plate, and then we'll tighten the screw so it doesn't move out of place. And we'll work our way around the build plate until we get it done. So now we'll get the NC board mount and mount it on these two holes right here. And then, but before we do that, we're going to get the X-axis cable, motor cable, and run it through this slot right here. So that way when it's mounted, it goes right through here. Before we mount the NC board mount, we want to attach the board to the mount. and plug the x-axis motor into the board, so that way once the mount is attached, because we have to position the cable through this slot right here, and once it's attached to the printer frame, it will not be possible to insert the motor cable. So we got 3 M310 screws and 4 M310 screws and 4 hex nuts. So basically mount one at each corner. So that's what it should look like. We got the axis motor cable coming through here, plugged into the top left slot. Kind of dark, so I don't know if you can see it. With the board in place with the 4 M310 screws, with the 2 frame screws. So the next step will be to finish plugging in the rest of the wires. So we can see a few of the cables I've got plugged in so far. Again, this is the stock traditional mk3s board. I decided to swap the SKR 1.4 32-bit board out for this one. Main reason is I don't have all the adapter pieces like for the pin to probe, and I don't have enough extensions for the stepper motor cables because it's mounted higher up and it's a different board size, so it's not exactly positioned correctly. But once I get all that stuff taken care of, I'll attempt to swap the boards back out again. But anyways, here's what we got for the stock board. We got the motor cables on this side. We have the 4 power supply connections and the 2 heat bed connections. We have the panic cable, the heat bed thermistor. We have the filament sensor, 2 display cables, pin to probe. And that's it for right now. I'm still looking to get the adapter for the part fan, and it's a few cables I need to get for the hot end, and then we can test power the printer on. So pretty much here's the final board mounted. You can look at the diagram and the instructions to see the cable positions on all the components. It takes a little bit to explain this video, but yeah, that's basically it for the electronics portion. So now we're getting ready to move on to the pre-flight checks. Going to add the firmware, do the mesh bed leveling, make sure the software is up to date, all that type of stuff. Okay, so I had initially the self-test on this printer beforehand, but after I upgraded the firmware to be able to print something, it started flashing these symbols, so I unfortunately can't show you the self-test on this video. So here are the finished prints that I've tried. One's PLA on the left and the other one is pt3 on the right. So obviously it's not the best quality, but it proves that you can add the enable hot end to the Prusa mk3 printer. The main issue I need to fix is the part fan, and I need to adjust some of the firmware settings like I showed you before. I think I just need to calibrate the flow and some other things on the stock firmware. If not, I'll look into maybe making a custom firmware setting, but that's for a different video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video for this week. I know it's kind of long, and so I hope you guys enjoyed the video for this week. I know it's kind of long, but we finally got to wrap up the Prusa mk3s enable hot end 3 program build. It took a really long time to source most of the parts and figure out how to adapt the enable hot end to the printer, but it worked out. There's still a few hardware issues that we need to work on to get the printer to print at better quality. One being a part fan shroud, or the part fan overall. Another would be to update the firmware or printer settings to increase the speed, since this hot end is different from the traditional Prusa hot ends, which is mainly E3D variants. And this hot end can print faster, so we need to work on that. Fine tune the slicer settings. Just a few odds and ends like that. But anyways, thanks for watching this video. If you haven't clicked subscribe, please click subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Make sure to click subscribe and give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time.